Welcome and good afternoon, everyone, to our INOCO webinar. I am Hélène Sauret. I'm one of the co-founders of INOCO, and I'm delighted to be your moderator for today's session. Here at INOCO, we are deeply engaged in collaborating with grocery retailers, helping them in assessing the product climate footprint of their entire food range. A shared concern among all the retailers we talk to is the looming CSRD. During our conversation with them, we often hear questions like, how do we initiate the process? How do we practically meet all the legal requirements? And this is precisely the reason why Marcus and I decided to host this webinar to provide answers to these pressing questions. Our focus today is on CSRD compliance, insight and solution for grocery retailers. It's an intricate topic that demands expertise, and we are very fortunate to have an active expert in the reporting field joining our discussion today. So please join me in welcoming Clara Güte to the conversation. Maybe let's go to the next slide. Clara is a senior consultant at Ernst & Young, specializing in climate change and sustainability practices in Vienna. She brings a wealth of expertise to our discussion, holding a bachelor's degree in environment and energy from Rhein-Waal University of Applied Sciences and a master's degree in environmental sciences from the University of Vienna. Clara has extensive experience in auditing sustainability reports, conducting CSRD gap assessments, and performing materiality assessments for retailers and various other industries. To join Clara, Marcus Linder, CEO and founder of INOCO. Marcus is an impact entrepreneur, impact investor, founder, and a keynote speaker with an impressive track record spanning over 15 years in the startup scene. He started his entrepreneurial journey in 2006 while still a student in Vienna, founding his first startup, Zovu. Under his leadership, Zovu rapidly scaled to become a global market leader, securing over $200 million in venture capital. In more recent years, Marcus has redirected his focus towards addressing some of the most pressing challenges of our time, the biodiversity and the climate crisis. And this is why in 2020, he founded his second venture, INOCO, a retail solution designed to help grocery retailers, F&B brands, and food suppliers in assessing and communicating the impact of their food products across the entire value chain. So a very, very warm welcome to the two of you. Let's take maybe a quick look at the agenda. Exactly. So the topic we're tackling is broad and complex, but our focus today is on the practical implementation of the CSRD. So after a brief overview, Clara will guide us through the sustainability reporting requirements with a special focus on the double materiality assessment. Drawing from her experience with grocery retailers, she will shed light on the primary challenges they face. Following that, Marcus will provide us with practical examples showcasing the solutions available today to address these challenges. And as usual, we have reserved 10 minutes at the end of the session to address any question you may have. Feel free to drop your question directly in the chat at any time during the webinar, and we will make sure to answer those at the end of the session. So let's make this session engaging and interactive. And without any further ado, let's get started. So Clara, the stage is yours.
Yes, thank you. Thanks a lot for this lovely introduction. Also very welcome, warm welcome from my side. Yeah, if we can already jump to the next, to our first slide. I'm gonna give you a little introduction, just a very quick reminder of the CSRD schedule that we currently have. So the CSRD have been adopted by the Commission now in July of 2023 for the general ESRS, so our European Sustainability Reporting Standards. And as of next year, so starting from 1st January 2024, we are already large capital orientated companies are already starting to collect their data, as they have to report in 2025. And then for January 2025, it starts that the larger remaining companies have to report on their sustainability data, and then in 2026, small and medium enterprise capital markets are following. And also with looking a little bit further, we have then 6 years after the first CSRD reporting, the reasonable assurance that comes into place. But I'm going to explain that a little bit more on the next slide, please. So with the revision of the NFRD, we have significantly more reporting disclosures that we have to follow. So now companies use still use for this reporting period the GRI, which is voluntary, but now with the CSRD we have the ESRS that are mandatory and have a much broader range on reporting requirements that need to be followed. What is also new is that the sustainability informations, they need to be published within the management report. So this is to give the sustainability data much more importance, to put them on the same level as the financial data. So it's not allowed anymore to publish them in a separate report. They have to be in the management report. What is also new, to have a mandatory external audit. So within the first years, it's the limited assurance that the companies need to do. And the limited assurance is more focusing on understanding the actual process, where the data collected, and doing limited sample testing on the data. And then with the reasonable assurance that comes into place 6 years after the first reporting, the assurance is much more into detail. So it's a higher level of assurance. And here there are much more samples that are being tested, and the focus is also on internal control system, and if those internal control systems were documented. The next step, I'm going to talk about the double materiality. So the double materiality is actually the basis of every sustainability report now. We can already jump to the next slide, please. So as I said, it's the basis of the sustainability report. So we have a broad range of topics that are given by the ESRS. And for these topics, we need to evaluate the impact of the company in order to be able to identify our topics, which then need to be reported on. So when we look at those topics, we always need to take into account the entire value chain. So we are not only focusing on own operations, but also on upstream and downstream operations, so the entire value chain. And the first step is to have to look at the impact materiality. So we're actually looking on what are the impacts of my company on the environment or on the people, the society. And here we are looking at actual and potential positive and negative impacts. And then on the other hand, we are looking on the financial materiality, which is the effect that the environment or the society has on the company. So here we are assessing the financial risks and opportunities that are developing through my dependencies. So I am dependent on skilled labor, for example, and therefore my risks would be to lose skilled labor, for example. So here we are looking at the financial impact that are happening to the company. On the next slide, I did a little hotspot analysis for the topics that are most likely to be material for retailers. So from the ESRS, there are 10 topics and much more subtopics and sub-subtopics. But here we stayed on the level of the topics. And most definitely climate change will be an important topic from the impact perspective. The hotspot is definitely within the scope 3 when we look at the value chain. So from the upstream value chain, the scope 3 emission will most probably make the biggest part of the emissions. And then also from the upstream value chain, the land use change that are happening, or deforestation, for example. What could be the risks here? Definitely business disruptions that could affect the pricing of the products, and these could happen through physical climate risk when we have more droughts, for example, that could reduce the crop yield, but also transitional risks. So there are not only risks, but also opportunities. So, for example, supply chain transparency or an improved supply chain resilience when focusing on more regenerative agriculture, or lower carbon products when advancing the product portfolio. Another hotspot would be biodiversity and ecosystems. Here, from the impact perspective, the exploitation and overuse of natural resources, but also the direct biodiversity loss and reduction of ecosystem services or ecosystem resilience when supporting monocultures, for example. The risk could be increased input costs in the supply and supply chain disruption when reducing ecosystem services. An opportunity could be to again focus on regenerative agricultural practice, and also using the synergies between climate change and biodiversity. They are so interlinked that it is of advantage to tackle those two topics together. Another point from the environmental perspective is the E5 that focus on circular economy and also on waste production, for example. So here as an impact, the plastic waste and the food waste would be that happen along the value chain are important. And as a risks, these are financial costs that are happening through waste-related regulations or increased disposal costs. But as an opportunity, there also would be new business models, for example, to reduce waste or focus more on circular economy and reduce the costs from food waste. Okay, if we jump to the next slide, where we have some social topics and governance topics. So within the social topics, next to the own employers that are obviously very important, another hotspot topic would be the workers in the value chain. So especially for retailers in the upstream value chain, there could be the risks, especially for high-risk supply chains, for inadequate working conditions and non-compliance with human rights. So high-risk supply chains could be nut production or cacao production, or the non-food segment for retailers. Risk could be reputational risk that lead to financial losses. As an opportunity, one could say, to improve the ethical reputation due to a more thorough due diligence and improvement, and focusing on for example, projects that support or lead against support human rights, for example. Another social topic would be the consumers and end users that are definitely important for retailers. As an impact, it could be the misinformation or misleading claims on products or the product safety, for example, but also a positive impact to protect the children due to responsible marketing practice, not just supporting sweets, for example, for children, but a healthier lifestyle. The risk here could be financial losses or legal consequences when not being compliant with product safety or having reputational risks through that. For opportunities, there is the opportunity to increase the trust in products and increase sales and revenues when benefiting from that. Under the G1, so the business conduct, there's the topic of management of supplier relationships, and here the impact could be to impact small and medium enterprises because they are, for example, very reliant on payment practices of large retailers, and larger retailers maybe have like a longer payment period or terms where they could affect the cash flow of the small and medium enterprises. As a risk here could be the increased operational costs from supply chain disruptions, or maybe delays or shortages that are coming from smaller suppliers. As an opportunity, we would see to have a stronger supplier relationship, and to build those relationships in order to have maybe more reliable suppliers and on-time delivery and increased quality. Yes, so these are some of the hotspot topics. The double materiality analysis can obviously go into much more detail with all the subtopics and subtopics that one can evaluate. So this is just a brief overview, but I think it already highlights quite well where the hotspots would be. Thanks. If we can then jump to the next slides. We have here some challenges of the CSRD implementation. So as I already said a couple of times, I think the biggest challenge would be to incorporate all the data from the upstream value chain. So the biggest impact for a grocery retailer is actually in the upper value chain and not within own operation. So collecting and managing all those data and all the informations is of course a huge challenge. And also most of the suppliers probably are not falling under the CSRD, so most probably they have not prepared all their data already in compliance with the CSRD, so this could be a huge challenge. Saying that, the emission calculation is also a big challenge, especially the scope 3 emissions. Here we have a very complex calculation of the indirect emission. Here, when calculating the scope 3 emissions, there are also like different ways of calculating it. So one could start with the spend-based method. However, here it is the challenge that it is very difficult to set specific targets because the target setting would only be to reduce the costs. But when calculating it more throughout and including, for example, data from suppliers, it is much more challenging, but also brings the opportunity to set much more efficient targets. Another challenge is to have the data then standardized. So keeping in mind that the retailers have so many products and such a global supply chain with so many different data coming in, that this will be a huge challenge to standardize all this data and deliver them transparently. Then also the technology adaptation would be another challenge, to actually develop this technology infrastructure and integrating those systems into the current operations and using them. And one of the last challenges I have is the continuous monitoring, also looking at the double materiality assessment. It is important to continuously monitor it, have a look if there were significant changes, if the double materiality then needs to be changed, but also continuously monitoring of the data. Yes.
Perfect.
I will give my word to Marcus.
Thank you, Clara. It was really great. I love the overview. It was detailed, but it was also practical. Like how you showed how every activity from a retailer have an impact. Every impact have risk, but also opportunity attached to it. And the opportunities and the risk, they spread among social, ecological, environment, etc. So it is really a complex topic.
Yes.
So now what I would like to do, you presented us, the last slide was about the challenges. And I would like to ask Marcus now to go through all the challenges presented and tell us how can grocery retailer practically overcome those challenges. Are there any solution today that grocery retailer can use to overcome those challenges? So Marcus, the stage is yours.
Yeah, very much excited to dive into this topic. And Clara, thank you very much for laying the ground, basically. I think we need to go
next slide.
Not the previous slide. Exactly. First, before we dive in, a very brief introduction. Who is Enoco? So Enoco is a software as a service company that really provides solutions for the grocery retail industry to manage and reduce the sustainability impacts of the entire assortment. We assess a product's life cycle, taking the ingredients, the composition, the processes into account, allow them to report on carbon, but also have further impact dimensions on the horizon. And we are 100% focused on the needs of the food, beverage, and grocery retail industry, which is really crucial. Next slide. Now I'm trying to address challenge number 1 and 2 that Clara pointed out for us. So she mentioned that there is obviously the challenge of the retailer, that the highest impact of the grocery retailer with regards to basically all the topics, no matter whether we talk about carbon, we talk about biodiversity, we talk about social, we talk about almost any aspect, really lies within the supply chain and upstream. So there is a huge challenge in terms of collecting, managing, reporting that data, especially taking into account the fact that grocery retailers typically have tens of thousands of products on the shelf. And basically, they need to work. They have lots of suppliers who are not really, mandated to report on CSRD and need to find ways to get them on board. Also, emission calculation, especially scope 3 emission calculation, is a huge challenge. Complex calculation of indirect emissions, granular calculation of to be able to set specific targets, and obviously dealing with those multinational supply chains. So how can grocery retailer address that? Let's take a look at the next slide. Maybe before we think about how to address it, we need to understand again the severity of the challenge. So basically, most grocery retailers, 93% of their emissions come from their scope 3. And the very large part of it really comes from their upstream supply chain. So it's not that much about, you know, the trucks that deliver the products from the warehouse to their stores, or, you know, the electricity at their stores, but it's really what they sell and where that comes from. And there's really at the moment, you know, a lack of scalable data collection solutions, which would allow them to really collect data across their complex and fragmented supply chain through that massive assortment. Obviously, all the retailers we're talking to are really extremely overwhelmed by what some of them call the green wave in terms of regulation. That's basically, yeah, they are facing to deal with. So many of you on this webinar are very well aware of what I'm talking about. CSRD is only one of many regulations that the grocery retailers need to adhere to and handle to, and they have very limited resources to do that. At the same time, there are still quite some uncertainties around regulation, methodology, consumer behavior, and things are moving extremely fast in that area. And congratulations to all of you who work in food. You have probably chosen the most difficult field of them all, because the impact of food is so highly variant. It really depends which region you source your ingredients from, at what time of the year, what the agricultural practices look like. And this is completely, yeah, a big and very interesting challenge that basically we all are facing here. Next slide, please. Okay, so how do we at Enoco assess the impact of these tens of thousands of food and beverage products of grocery retailers? We have basically learned, if you start approaching your suppliers, ask them millions of questions, you typically don't make a lot of progress, because they're overwhelmed by, you know, all of these reporting efforts, and that approach doesn't really work at all. So what we do is, we basically take the product data the grocery retailers have available already today. For example, for this ready-made pizza, the ingredients that you would find on the back of the pack, or the nutritional value of the product, the labels, like for example, an EU organic label, obviously information like weight and similar data, which the retailer already have available for their thousands of products, because they need to have that data due to other, legal requirements. And then we have an AI-based product composition algorithm that allows us to basically re-engineer the recipe of the product. So we know how much wheat is on that pizza, how much, for example, tomato are on that pizza, how much spinach. And then we apply impact factors for all the ingredients and all the processes that go into the production of this product. And for consumer communication and for supplier communication, we initially use conservative values when calculating the impact of this product. Why do we do that? Because for consumer communication, we definitely want to avoid, greenwashing. And if you basically use average data to communicate the impact of products, you basically put, half of the products on the shelf in a more favorable light than they actually deserve, because in reality, the impact varies quite significantly. And you're basically doing producers who are not taking care of sustainability at all a big favor by just using average industry data to assess their product. But we also do that because by doing so, we and the retail customers create a very strong incentive for the producers to share more and more product specific and more primary data over time. Because whenever a producer then shares on our platform, no, my wheat doesn't originate from, let's say, Canada, but it originates from Italy or from the Ukraine, we can basically reduce that that margin of safety that we are applying on the data, and we can evaluate that product in a more representative way, which typically leads to, over time, the more data we get, that the impact of the product is going down. So the impact of the product is decreasing. So this way we have basically created a methodology that allows us to assess the tens of thousands of private label brand and third-party brand products of our grocery retail customers at scale. We take ingredients into account, the composition of the product, the processes. So for example, for pizza, we know that there is industrial baking involved. We take a look at the national energy grid mix of the production countries. We know that there's industrial like freezing, you need to store that pizza for a certain number of days. And all of these processes, the packaging, are taken into account in a very granular way. And as mentioned, we basically have a methodology that really creates this strong incentive for producers to share more and more and more data over time. Yeah, next slide, please. So how does this look in practice? Basically, we assess products across the entire life cycle, so starting at farm stage. And it's very important for you to understand that the biggest impact with regards to food products really lies at the farm stage. So it's not that much about the packaging that consumers frequently have on top of mind, or about how these products are transported, but it's really very much about what is within the product and how is it being produced. How are these ingredients are being produced, and that all happens on the farm stage level, which typically accounts for about 80% of the impact of food and beverage products. But as mentioned, we also take into account production, like the industrial baking in the example of the pizza, obviously the transportation from the farm to the factory, from the factory to the central warehouse, to the stores. We take the storage stage, the retail stage, up to the disposal stage, basically into account. And we do not only provide, or we do not only calculate one value or one set of values, we calculate two sets of values. We calculate one data point, which is the scope 3 footprint of the product. And here we use primary or product specific data wherever available. So if we know that the wheat originates from Italy, we would use the Italian value for wheat. Plus we use average values or average data for, let's say, everything else where we don't know how exactly those processes work. But on the other hand, we provide our grocery retail customers with an additional pair of values for consumer and supplier communication. And here we use also primary or product specific data whenever made available by the producer or by the retailer through their private label brand databases, plus conservative data. So here we basically add a margin of safety onto the average values to make sure that we avoid greenwashing, and to make sure that we can create that strong incentive for the suppliers to share more and more data over time. But obviously for reporting, so for SBTI, for CSRD, we use the average data, but we recommend not to share this data on a product specific level with consumers or with retailers. Next slide, please. Yeah, what do you get as a retailer ultimately? On our platform, you have access to basically the reporting value, to the consumer facing value, which is typically a bit higher. You also see the emission breakdown of the products. So for example, at that hummus, we can also see that 71% of the impact of this hummus originate from the agriculture stage, but also like the hotspots. So you really see which ingredient, which production process, what's the impact of packaging, of the spices, of transport. And this obviously now lays the foundation for really going into optimization. And I think that's something very important that Clara said earlier, that obviously you could start reporting for CSRD, for SBTI by using, more like either category average values. But then you have the problem that unless your consumers are really changing their purchasing behavior and transitioning from high emission categories towards low emission categories, so buying less meat, buying more plant-based products, you cannot move, you cannot make progress on your Scope 3 emissions. And due to this much more granular assessment of the products that we are able to deliver, you suddenly see where are the hotspots of the products on an individual product level, but also on an assortment level. And you can then enter into conversations with your private label brand suppliers, with your A-brand suppliers, and really try to tackle these challenges one step at a time. We're not going to talk about Inoko Optimize today. It's an upcoming feature, which will actually really support in the optimization process. But I think it's important to understand why more detailed product-specific reporting and impact assessment is really key if you want to make progress on your Scope 3 emissions. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Yeah, we basically see three ways on, how to not only report on your Scope 3 emissions, but how to really make progress and reducing your emissions. One is for grocery retailers to obviously reduce the impact of private label brand products. One is to increase pressure on suppliers to step-by-step reduce the impact of their products. The third one is to really engage with consumers and to help consumers to transition to a more sustainable and more healthy diet. And this is really what you can also use that data for. So really see this work that you're doing here, not just, as necessary evil to fulfill your regulatory requirements, but really see it as an opportunity to engage with your consumers around the opportunity, sustainable and healthy nutrition. And you have the opportunity to become their coach, their preferred partner who really helps them to step-by-step transition towards a healthy and more sustainable diet through providing them insights onto which products are more sustainable, less sustainable, through rewarding them, through offering them challenges, nudge them into the right direction, give them challenges, gamified experience. And I think this is a very exciting opportunity and a really huge business opportunity for grocery retailers, because there is more and more consumers out there who want to do the right thing, who want to shop in a more sustainable way, and who would be, very eager to get help and to have you as their partner helping them on that journey. And this is really a great opportunity to engage with them as you enter into getting a more and more granular understanding of the impact of the products that you are selling. Yeah, let's move on to the next slide. Challenge number 3, data standardization. So we've heard from Clara that there is diverse data sources provided by, by the suppliers, data collection. It's really hard to understand the data that you as a retailer get from your suppliers. You have the big challenge that they are basically providing, that they're using different methodologies, different databases, underlying databases to assess the impact of their products. So it's really really hard to compare products from one and the same, within one and the same category from different suppliers, because they're just not comparable, the methodologies they're using, which obviously also gets down to data accuracy. So how do you deal with that challenge? Let's move on to the next slide, please. I think what we need to see is that lots of our retail customers in the past have really been reporting for SBTi or similar standards. They just used like a category average value. So every sauce on the shelf, no matter whether it's full of beef or completely vegan, basically had the very same value. And that's in the first instance enough to probably survive one of the first audits in terms of CSRD. Maybe Clara can dive a bit deeper on that later, also during the questions and answers. But again, the big challenge with that is you cannot make progress. You cannot move forward. You are not going to be able to see a reduction in your in the impact. Unless you have very large suppliers who are obviously on that journey, who will be able to report on the progress they are making in terms of the emissions of their products. but the vast amount of mid-sized and small companies, and here we still talk about billion-dollar companies, are still super overwhelmed with this topic and not moving into the right direction at all yet. And they need your support as grocery retailer, because if you don't help them, they won't be able to make progress. And this obviously has the negative consequences for you, that you ultimately at a certain point will have to decide to delist their products, which means you will get even more dependent on large suppliers who do their homework. You will even be less able to support the requirements of your customers to provide them with locally produced products. And therefore, we believe it's really crucial that you, as the grocery retailer, support your SME customers, SME suppliers on that journey, and also use that data ultimately, not only for reporting, but also use it internally for management decisions. You know, like this is an example from one of our customers who until recently only had basically, you know, I think 3 values for pizzas. And now they can really distinguish between each and every different pizza they have on the shelf and see, you know, that they have some pizzas with 11 kilogram of CO2 equivalent, and others with 3 kilogram. And obviously they can take those decisions into account when promoting products, when providing incentives, when having conversations about listing or delisting products. And these are all steps within the organization that help them to basically reduce the impact of their scope 3 emissions, because we all need to remind ourselves again and again, it's not about reporting. It's really about you being able to over time reduce your emissions, because in the end, you know, NGOs will now have access to your to the progress that you're making, will do benchmarks between retailers, and companies who are not moving forward here and who are not making progress here obviously run into a large risk to lose customers, to lose employees who increasingly want to work for a company that's part of the solution and not part of the problem. They run into the risk of obviously also losing investors. It will be more difficult to get access to money, affordable money. Green bonds are already used as an instrument by more and more retailers. So there's really lots of incentives to make progress here. Okay, next slide, please. To provide you some insights in terms of the granularity of the data. So we at Inoco initially worked with basically third-party databases to assess the impact of those thousands of products. But we soon figured out that this approach is very much flawed, because most of these databases work based on a value that has been derived from a couple of LCAs that have been done on a couple of farms. And then you're supposed to use the value of potatoes from France as a proxy for Poland or for a different country, whereas in reality, there's a massive difference in terms of the impact of the production of one and the same ingredient across different countries. Like wheat in Austria has an impact of about 0.4 kilogram. But if you purchase wheat from Brazil, and also obviously we have to take deforestation into account, so land use change, you will see that the impact of 1 kilogram of wheat is significantly higher there. The same is true for rice or basically every other ingredient there. You really have huge differences from country to country. And that's why it's so important to gather more and more data from your suppliers about where do the ingredients come from, where are they sourced from. This is really the opportunity that you have here in this area. And we have basically built our own database, which is following IPCC guidelines and taking additional guidance from EUPEF and other sources. And meanwhile, we cover about 160 crops from around 200 territories, all relevant land and sea-based animal, and are therefore able to really assess the impact of thousands of food and beverage products in a very accurate way. Next slide, please. Yeah, challenge 4 and 5, technology adaptation. So developing the technology infrastructure is key to tackle that challenge. integration into existing systems. Obviously, the continuous monitoring and dynamic nature of the materiality is key, and let's see how we can address that. So next slide, please. So basically back to, and I just had a, a meeting with managing director of a very large retailer yesterday, who told me how he and his team are really very overwhelmed by all the regulation that's coming in at the moment and all the things they're supposed to do. And I'm sure many of you on this call feel with them. And what we've really learned is that the key to success is to really start working with the data that you as a retailer have available today. Basically, the data that you have on your packs, that you typically have in your online shops, and then use that to assess the impact of your products through the platform, provide you the data that you need for reporting, but also provide you the data that you need for consumer communication, and then engage, then use our platform to engage with your suppliers and allow them in a hotspot-driven way to provide us with more and more and more data over time. And this also solves a second big problem, or two problems that retailers typically have. One problem is that suppliers are typically very reluctant to share insights about their supply chain with you as a retailer, because they're worried that you have an even better understanding of how their prices are calculated. They're worried about you copying the product with your own private label brand. And we can mitigate that because we are basically the independent player in the middle who can gather all that data, all those insights from your suppliers. We keep them under NDA, and we only share the results that really matter for you, to you. So this is one challenge. And this other challenge is that when we talk to food and beverage brands, they are also very much overwhelmed with the huge reporting effort they have, feeding different types of data into all those different proprietary databases the retailers are currently trying to set up, just completely overwhelms them and drags away their resources from what they actually should work on, which is lowering the impact of their products. Instead of being able and having the resources to lower the impact of products, 95% of the resources are really going into reporting, and that's a big issue at the moment, which we also solve because obviously, a food and beverage brand can report their data to us once for their products, and we can then distribute that across their grocery retailers and allow them to use that, give them back time to really focus on the actual optimization. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, next slide, Q&A.
Perfect.
We have lots of Q&A, lots of questions coming in. So.
Exactly. And we're perfect on time. So thank you both. Yeah, thank you, Marcus, for answering all the challenges. I think it was very clear and also very detailed. I am overwhelmed with a number of questions. So let's start. So let me take the first one. So from Martin, I'm going to start at the beginning. So in ESG, I think this one is for Clara. You have selected several sections, for example, S2, S4, G1. On what basis, basically, did you take this selection? Is that the retailers have to do this, or was it just an example?
So I think this question and also the last one that we just received in the chat, I will tackle them together because they're very interlinked. So the double materiality assessment is mandatory by the CSRD, and the double materiality is basically your starting point for the sustainability reporting. So you're first going to look at all those topics that are under the ESRS, and then identify, okay, which of these topics are actually important for my company, so for the retailer, and the topics that are most going to be likely to be material for retailers, I highlighted within the presentation. So for example, because within the double materiality assessment, we need to look at the entire value chain. Here it was mentioned, for example, S4, the consumers and end users. I mean, they are your most important stakeholders, and therefore they are most likely to be a very material topic for retailers. So with the impacts that you have on them, and also with the huge risks that are that the financial risks if all your customers are unhappy. So this is a very likely topic. And yeah, for the other topics I mentioned, they are basically the hotspot topics. So it is not said that retailers need to report on them, but within your double materiality assessment, you will most likely come to this conclusions.
Okay, and since you're talking about reporting, I'll get to the question from Svante. Any idea on what level of detail is required by CSRD to report Scope 3 Category 1 emission? Are high-level spend-based calculation enough, or do we need more detailed calculation?
Yeah, I think so for the Scope 3 emissions, they need to look at all the categories that are under the Scope 3. And now when talking about the 3.1, in general, I would say it is enough to do a higher level spend-based method, but with a huge but, as also Marcus mentioned a couple of times, it is very difficult to set specific targets with it. And also, looking forward, a more detailed approach is definitely needed. And it is always important to then disclose within the report on which level of detail was used for the calculation. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, maybe one for Marcus. How can grocery retailers standardize data from various sources, especially when dealing with diverse products and suppliers? So how do we do that?
So basically, the publicly available data is very much standardized already, right? So you have those legal requirements to report on the ingredients, the nutrient values, the labels, and here here we are pretty much fine with that. The next step that we typically see is that grocery retailers provide us exports from their private label brand databases, where they have in a structured way additional data, like for example, the country of origin of key ingredients, but also the exact quantity of the ingredients within the products. And here we typically see that there's already some kind of standardization in terms of the input data out there. Obviously, standardization in the sense of comparing data from suppliers, we see at the moment in the short term no practical way, that the suppliers provide you with a product carbon footprint value, and then you make them comparable, because there's so many assumptions built into those product carbon footprint calculations, different life cycle stages, different databases, that basically the only answer that the only solution that we really see is that you as a retailer deploy a technology that calculates the impact of products based on one consistent methodology. And it's much more important that the methodology is consistent across the various products, especially if you then want to take decisions in terms of listing or unlisting products, in terms of consumer communication, than anything else. And this is here really the key approach that I see. Hope I answered the question.
Yes, and I think we have a kind of related question going into this supplier. So what initiatives can retailers take to minimize redundant reporting effort for suppliers serving multiple retailers? I think you had a case like this already at Inoko.
Yeah, I think I tried to answer that earlier already a little bit, that we really see a huge opportunity for us here to really become this central platform between the food and beverage producers and the grocery retailers on the other side, that really limits efforts for everyone involved, because ultimately the producers, they don't want to report into 10 different platforms. They much rather want and should spend their time on optimizing and reducing the impact of their product. And this approach also solves this issue that producers actually don't want to report, their details about their supply chains to their retailers because of the reasons I mentioned earlier. So this is here really the way we see the way to go basically in this area.
Okay, another question from Ignace. How are you looking towards the Eco Score, which is now already rolled out in Belgium and France? And I guess the question could be applied to any other label out there. What's your opinion on this?
Yeah. I think this is something we actually need to see not that much in the context of CSRD, but much more in the context of the Green Claims Directive. And the problem with the eco-score kind of approach is that it will be very likely not, compliant from a Green Claims Directive. I mean, Green Claims Directive is still in the making, lots of changes going on, but there's multiple factors that speak against it. So one is that eco-score is aggregating, it's a high-level aggregated value. So labels like that aggregate basically everything into one value will very likely not be allowed unless standardized on a European level. So that's one problem we see. And the other problem we see that the eco-score is, not really strictly scientific in the sense of the underlying methodology. You have plus points and minus points for packaging, for country of origin of ingredients, and so on. And that's kind of, not an approach that would be really 100% in line with a product life cycle assessment. Therefore, we are quite skeptical about the eco-score. We also see the weak point that the eco-score does not really move and touch the hearts of consumers. What we have seen is that by aggregating everything into one score, consumers don't really relate to it anymore, because some of them care about animal welfare, others care about climate, others care about social. This is why we are really pursuing this approach where we provide multiple impact dimensions on the Inoco product impact assessment label and really use topics the consumers are already interested in today as a hook to dive deeper, to learn more about the impact of food products. This is why we don't see, and I think retailers who did tests here, like Lidl, Colruyt, see unfortunately not that much traction in terms of behavior change. And based on our learnings, this is really due to the fact that it's just way too much aggregated. So the way to go is somewhere in the middle. Don't offer your consumers 16 impact dimensions that would overwhelm them, but also this high-level aggregation into one factor did not really prove to work in terms of changing, influencing the behavior of consumers. But in general, I need to say the labels, in my opinion, are a bit overrated. For us, the labels are the tip of the iceberg. Much more important is the data that you can then use to communicate with your customers, to provide them content, to recommend alternatives, to engage with them, to gamify this transition towards a healthier and more sustainable diet. This is much more important than the label, but obviously, label will still play an important role. A little bit an extended answer to a topic which is a little bit not related to the
we have to maybe do a webinar about label. But anyway, let me take the last question because we're slightly running out of time. When working on an emission reduction plan, where to start with products like hummus or the pizzas mentioned? How to make the right choices in starting the emission reduction plan? Maybe I think Marcus is for you. So
yeah, I mean, the approach that we take is really hotspot by hotspot. So you saw on that one slide that on a product level, you really see what's the biggest hotspot. Like at the hummus, you could see that the sesame seeds have the biggest impact, because believe it or not, for example, sesame seeds from Ethiopia, where lots of sesame seeds come from, have a huge impact because of various factors like inefficiency, land use change, and so on and so on. And there are ways and technologies like what Clara mentioned earlier, also, for example, SaaS platforms that support farmers in transitioning towards a more regenerative agricultural practices that can really help farmers to make progress there. And the way to go is really on a hotspot by hotspot basis, not only product by product, but really aggregated on the aggregated view with regards to all the products that a supplier is delivering to you. Yeah, that's really the way to approach this. And obviously also it's important to set the right incentives for the producers, you know, recommend more sustainable products as alternatives. Also clearly speak up and say, hey, we are going to delist 5% of products per category every year. We will basically list out the least, you know, the most products with the biggest impact. So there's lots of measures you can take, but that's again a separate webinar, I believe, to really dive deep into this question.
Great. Then thank you both. Thank you everyone for attending the webinar. We will send the recording, but if you have any question, you know, you can always send us an email to hello@inoco.com. And thank you to the two speakers. I think it was a fantastic and very insightful webinar. Thank you, Clara, for your time and your insights.
Yes, thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.